Absolutely.
Like that one? It is Tell Me You're Joking. Which is a living, breathing podcast that is going to continue to morph, oftentimes suck, sometimes entertain. The Mondays suck seem to have resonated, so I'm going to keep it going. We're gonna just spray the infield with news, pet peeves, whatever it might be. And joining me today, previous Tell Me You're Joking guest, long form guest, Mr. David Mesner. Do you like the Zner or are you a Messner?
You know, the Z rolls off the tongue better. I like it.
Sounds cool. When you hear it in headphones, it makes it all different, doesn't
That's right, a little bit.
For those of you that are listening that are anywhere near Gen X or similar, or you just have good taste in music, we are listening to a little New Order, Blue Monday, in honor of the blue skies here in St. Louis on, well, pseudo blue skies.
A little bit. You know, fun story about this song. The first time I heard the song was not on the radio. It was on the Wedding Singer soundtrack. As a bonus, not the song I bought it for. This was back in the day when you bought the album for the one song you liked.
Yeah.
This was a happy bonus.
Speaking of soundtracks, just real quick, I mean, let's totally jump the shark here. Movie soundtracks, what's your either Desert Island pick or rip off three quick ones?
Hunt for Red October, Last of the Mohicans, Interstellar.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not normally stumped. Those stump me.
Bonus would be Wedding Singer. And I think the reason I wouldn't do Wedding Singer off the top is because the instrumental soundtrack, I think, has a lot more staying power, especially if you're on a desert island. It's a little bit easier to kind of lose yourself and not go crazy versus if I hear...
Yeah, see, if I'm on that desert island, I'm already lost, right? And I'm probably going crazy. So I'm going to go with Into the Wild in honor of a similar fellow that was in the wild and lost and went crazy.
Okay.
A little Eddie Vedder screaming in your ear for a minute. That'd be good. All right. The point of this show is moving forward. I want us to have just unhinged conversations, no guardrails. We'll trade topics back and forth. Any kind of bullshit that you see via Twitter or other. And I want to kick off today. You know, the news cycle is just the gift that keeps on giving these days. And nothing doesn't involve Elon at this point. So let's get right to the goods. Tesla.
Yes.
I got a lot of feelings about everything that's going on with Tesla. As a econ guy, you know, I manage our family's portfolios. Been trader, you know, on the sidelines for a long time. I was a huge fan of Tesla for years and years, putting my money where my mouth was. Mm-hmm. And then I took my money back where my mouth was in January and was like, nope, done. Great run, etc. And, you know, you fast forward to now, what is today? March 24th, the time of this recording. It's, you know, it's down 50% from its high post-election. But I don't want to get into the economics of it. I want to get into kind of this funny little hypocritical world of politics that we live in regarding Tesla. And I made notes, and I rarely make notes, but I was like, okay, bullet point 1, Tesla, dash. Libs built it, MAGA can save it.
Okay.
And to follow up that just incredible insight, if you would have put $1,000 in Tesla in 2010, the year it IPO'd, you would have $241,000 today. Mm-hmm. And from 2010 all the way up until 2024, the demographic that bought those cars were libs.
Sure.
Or anybody that believed in EV technology, or maybe tree huggers, or all of the above, right?
Yep.
And now here we are. So that's I want to go back to my bumper sticker. Libs built it, MAGA can save it. Thoughts on the conservative side in particular, just espousing all this sympathy. Forget about look. We can talk about the rioting, we can talk about the burning and the tearing and the keying and all that shit. That's stupid. But when it comes to ruining a company, how does that strike you when you hear that?
You really jumped the shark all the way to like my laundry list of really meaty subjects. So We live in a very weird time that it was not that long ago when the big diesel trucks were blocking the Tesla superchargers
with Trump flags.
with Trump flags. It just, I mean, how was that? Trump won, or was that Biden early years? I can't even
No,
remember.
that was October. I mean,
Yeah,
let's not kid ourselves.
So I think we're in this really weird place where people are switching sides on issues faster than I think we can predict. And I think I felt the same way about all of the all the clamoring about USAID. And I don't want to conflate too many issues, but I remember in the early 2000s, the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and everybody was screaming about George Bush and Halliburton and the World Bank. And USAID, because it was used as this foil for subverting other countries, and this was sort of a relic of the Cold War.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like it's the one that I'm going to jump on real quick there, and I want to immediately get back to Tesla.
Yeah.
USAID. Why are we spending money for PBS and Sesame Street in Iraq?
PBS only gets 1% of their funding from the federal government.
No, there's tons of statistics that just make this all crazy. But okay, why are we paying for Sesame Street in Iraq? In Iraq in their language, et cetera. Well, here's why: because we killed their parents. Right? These kids are growing up in slums, and most of them are missing family members due to a forever war. Right?
I think that's a great singular example, and we get and going back to Tesla, we get caught up on the singular example. The reason you invested in Tesla was not because they made a really cool, fast electric car. It was because they were doing the technology storage, they were doing the artificial intelligence, and so I think this is an example where we get caught up on the Cybertruck. And I'm curious, outside of Elon Musk right now, if we would all care so much if the Cybertruck was actually a good-looking car instead of the monstrosity it became after they launched it.
Well, I mean, they got a lot of different issues just from a car perspective, just from a design perspective.
Mm-hmm.
To your point, you alluding to the Cybertruck. Let's not kid ourselves. That is not a good design. And those that defend it, you're lying to yourself. There's a certain amount of red pillism that is coming into play if you think that's a good design.
Well, wait, because it is a good design for what it's supposed to be. And, look, we have the same conversation about St. Louis, right? The octogenarian in Clayton who says, well, I'd never go downtown. It's not necessarily for you, right? Like the urban environment is a different customer than suburban customer, the same way a Lamborghini is a different customer than a Toyota Camry.
So let me just get back to the original point. From a business perspective, again, I don't want to get into the weeds of the rioting side because I'm a wicked social conservative when it comes to you breaking shit. Mm-hmm. You break shit, go to jail. I don't care. Especially if you try to break into our Capitol and try to do that too. You want to burn down a Quick Trip? You know what? Get locked up. You want to break into the Capitol? You need to get locked up more. And if you want to go and burn a Tesla, there's statutes, on the books. Get caught? I don't care. But when it comes to you're ruining this company, no. Wall Street works in a very predictable way. You have CEOs, you have key employees that when they go public and they do things that are affecting the business itself, whether it's brand identity, whether it's sales, whether it's being, ingenuity, where you're so busy with this other thing, you're not coming up with new design. Because when you look at Tesla, from the original S's and the Roadster, the Roadster's not even out yet, the S, the X, the Y, et cetera, they're all the same. They're just slightly different versions size-wise. Mm-hmm. But from a distance, if you're looking at these cars from a half a mile away, no way you know which one's which.
I think that's fine though. Part of the magic of Tesla and the reason why they've been able to produce those cars is in large part because they they pioneered the stamping processes where they can do it much more efficiently, and
So-
that's the shareholder piece. I don't know. Well, I
But
think
but
more
are
importantly,
you
you're talking
okay?
about-
Are you okay with the stock value plummeting?
Yeah, why not?
Give it okay. Do you think the hypocrisy on the right and saying, you libs are ruining the company? No, libs made the company what it is.
Yes.
What's their
Yes,
responsibility?
no, and in between. So I think
what's
it's
their responsibility to their benevolent Doge leader to put their money where their mouth is and go buy a Tesla, even if they live in the middle of rural America where there are no chargers.
I think that statement has a lot of assumptions and implications in there.
Yeah, I'm in a dicky mood this.
And yeah, that's good. Mondays sucked. Right? This is great.
I know.
Let me pivot off of that. So I look at these things a little bit more meta because I think so many people are trapped in this singular focus of Elon and Doge is evil and they're doing all these nasty things. These are things that are totally outside of our control. Let me bring it a little bit more closer to home on things that are also outside of our control, but seem to be outside of people's focus. So I have seen more protests about Elon Musk and Doge, and we didn't hire Elon. I've not heard one word about any of those people doing anything for anybody who got hit by an E2 tornado a week ago.
Oh, totally.
So where I get where Mondays suck for me is I can't do anything about Trump or Elon or any of these things that are outside of my control. And yet the loudest people in our town who have the time on a Saturday to stand on a corner and just scream and holler are doing, they're doing nothing to help anybody who, Villa Ridge is not a rich part of town.
No.
Nor is North St. Louis or any of these other places that get by tornadoes. Go collect some food with your sign that says Elon sucks. Look what we're doing. And I think this is a disconnect across the country where we are so focused on things that are outside of our control, wishing things were better, but nobody's showing up to do it.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, in the last week, in true market style, because, here's the other thing. Is it all a pump and dump? Because there's that reality. And the 1 week number on Tesla is up 19%. So if, last Monday you drop, a nice little chunk of change in there because you're like, Tesla's not going anywhere. He's got the strength of the government behind him, right? You would have turned 20 points on your money, which is.
Let me put my tinfoil hat on.
You know what I'm saying?
Let me put my tinfoil hat on is I am a product of the global financial crisis. I graduated in 2009. And my tinfoil hat for many years has been basically from 2010 to now has been a global pump and dump because the underfunded pension funds, the underfunded entitlements that have all been financialized and placed into private capital and private equity. We are strip mining our economy and the lives of young people who are under 50 years old in order to pay for the global burden of an enormous baby boomer generation,
who's hoarding all their goods,
who are both hoarding all their goods and who are, by the way, also placing lots of barriers, raising the economic ladder, not only for underprivileged, for disinvested communities, underprivileged kids and otherwise, but also putting in.
That's a whole novel. I know where you're going with this. I'm gonna simplify and then I'm gonna open it up to you. What your first topic of the day is along those lines. When everybody's talking about the market in particular, they're like, markets are cyclical, their corrections are normal. And these are people with median incomes or average incomes that are closer to the median than their idols. Mm-hmm. They are not anywhere near the sphere that is able to benefit from this because the only people that are really benefiting from recessions or corrections are people that have excess cash to the tune of millions and millions and millions for macro, take advantage of it. So whenever somebody with $250,000 in their 401k and they're making $110K and they are MAGA and they want to bring all the jobs back, they're like, well, corrections are good. Okay, great. My question to you is, how much did you put in? How much did you have sitting on the sidelines? Did you drop 50K? Did you drop 100K? Or are you just spewing talking points? Because there's a difference between understanding markets, engaging markets, and manipulating markets. And they're getting played because their 401k is down what it's down.
True. And I think the idea that especially it's the same thing with media. It's the same thing with the financial world. the idea that, Joe Smith, the average investor, is making any kind of a difference as compared to, Vanguard, State Street, BlackRock, or anything else is a farce. I mean, it is, you're screaming into the wind. So here's a great question. I've got 3 rapid fires and then a meaty topic for you. Dinner food for breakfast. Where do you land on this? So like a cheeseburger at 9 a.m.
No, I'm complete opposite. I'm completely cool with pancakes and bacon for dinner.
Ooh, okay. I'm about that. See, I'm more cheeseburger at 9. I can do that. The trend of morning DJ sets and the bed by 10 movement of the younger generation. Are you familiar with this?
I've heard this is along the lines of that particular generation is also buying flip phones.
Yes. And we're moving away from a nightlife industry to a wellness industry.
1,000%. I have a sophomore in college, so I can speak anecdotally through his lived experience. Him and his crew, they're all down in Nashville, which is a party city.
Yes.
Their normal operations involve a fraction of the percentage of liquor that my generation took advantage of. 100%. Kids are drinking less. Going ahead and throwing another political lens on this thing, AB InBev. The reason why AB stock is doing shitty and why their numbers suck isn't because they put a transgender individual on a can. It's because kids don't drink that shit.
100%.
And those of us that are older, we're all, the beer belly's real, the you're on Lipitor, you're on all this stuff. Well, guess what? You're not drinking more either. So who's drinking more?
Actually, I just saw a graph about this in a study where baby boomers are actually drinking much more, and
it's called guilt.
Well, but so there's a weird. So I think this goes back. I think even to the Tesla question, right? There's this weird duality going on where baby boomers are drinking more, but they are also sort of the higher end consumers of the wellness industry that is emerging out of the lower consumption and higher demand from, I'll call it, young millennials to Gen Z, because we're kind of in a weird.
Well, the thing about boomers drinking, what I would want to see is give me the next paragraph, what demo or what product, because what I see for those that are a little older than me, the boomers in particular, it's not a 12-pack, it's not even a 6-pack, it's tequila on the rocks. It's spirits.
Yes.
Because they too, they get bloated more than most.
Expensive spirits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So niche brands. Really, the best story in liquor, and I don't have the data to prove it, but I bet if somebody looked it up, Tito's, the gluten-free vodka or whatever. I've heard it is the fastest growing product line within the beverage market, singularly speaking. Seltzers have done great, Sure. Seen bodybuilders drinking Trulies. I just don't. But it's to your point. It's the wellness generation.
And so I've started making this point as I've been reading more about it and learning more about it, and the algorithm is doing its work. This raises serious questions for the current approach to downtown development and bringing back, whether it's downtown St. Louis or any other downtown, because the leadership in charge and the generation of economic developers that's making these decisions, what do you hear? Late night restaurants, bars, nightclubs. If we can just bring back some of that magic, it's not coming back. And so how do you design an urban downtown that's oriented towards wellness? And I'll give you the example. Paris has the answer. They just voted 66% yesterday to pedestrianize 500 streets across the entire city. Now, if Paris can do it, I don't see why St. Louis can't do it. I think this is a good model, at least to follow in places that make sense.
I agree. Third point.
Where is our spring break anthem? What is the spring break anthem for this year?
Give me an example of a previous.
I guess you need Limp Bizkit, Spring Break '99.
Oh, you're talking about the song,
the song of the anthem, right? What is going on that this year we do not have a spring break anthem that's just in the ether of the pop culture?
Based on, let me see here. Let's try this one. It might be this one. Psst, I see dead people. Based on TikTok.
I guess so. Yeah. Sure.
Every soccer mom in the world is laying there with their AirPods drinking
that was kind of
tequila.
That's true. I guess it's the fall anthem. Usually we get a new song, right? I mean, I'm thinking Flow Rider. Like, where's our Flow Rider? spring break, feel good. Things are going to be fine because we're going into summer and we're out of winter.
Well, I have a theory, maybe. All the cool hip hop guys that used to actually make those songs are now hanging out in the country world. So all the cool kids that hate country music are like, I'm not listening to country. Well, they're all over there because now you have everything in rap and country. It's all just dirty pool water.
Have you heard? I think it's called recession rap or recession music, and it is referring to the specific kind of club tunes that came out between '08 and 2010. And it's this like nihilistic genre of music that's basically like, I'm broke, but I'm going out and things are going to be fine. Are you familiar with this?
Was it brought to you by Visa?
I don't remember. Yeah, what's the?
They're the label.
Timeless, yeah. Okay, so on that same, actually, sorry, I have two more points. So on that same line, murder hornets, bird flu, and what is the summer disaster? What's your pick right now for like what are we going to be worried about this summer, as like the new thing?
Baby boomers rioting. Because if this administration continues to, like, you're going to see the what is it, the fountains down in Florida? They're going to burn that shit down.
It's the summer of '69, except it's the full circle.
Social Security and Medi. As soon as these actions start to kind of permeate into day in, day out lifestyle. And look, you already have, and this is what I hate about what they're doing. There's a lot of things I hate about. I like what they are trying to do. Mm-hmm. This is one of those, the Republicans just have the absolute smartest consultants and messengers in the world of politics, period. Because
totally agree.
They've owned this, it's an 80-20 issue. Man, that's pretty fucking smart to frame it that way. It's true. Nobody's going to say, I'm opposed to getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, right? Nobody's going to say that.
They've been saying it since the 90s, or, constructively.
Yeah. Clinton and Gore were first. They were the ones that said, there's a lot of ways. We're going to figure this out. But what they did is they said, okay, now let's work with Congress because that's your job. Mm-hmm. We got the votes. We got the, quote, mandate. But Congress, you do your job. So anyway, my point is the summer fallout, the chaos that I think will start to really envelop in social media and conversations, the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of veterans that are being laid off in real time, compound that with slow integrations into cutting the spending on these Social Security or these mistakes that they're making, and we need to just quit sending these because these people are 700 years old. No, they're not. It's old software. It's bad software, but it's not dumb software. Yeah. So once the money is pulled out and drug prices are going to go up, these things are going to go up, you're going to see, I think you're going to see some massive activations.
So the baby boomer boogaloo.
I like, it's when you think in terms of protests and rioting and all this stuff, everybody just kind of assumes it's going to be zennials or kids that are pushing their limits as far as what they really believe, even though they've never traveled outside of their backyard. Boomers have lived a life. So whenever key components of their livelihood are fucked with, I think you're going to see some, not craziness, but you're going to see the volume of narrative swing from them.
All right, so here's the meaty subject. Thanks for the layup. How do you explain our commitments to ideas, systems, and behaviors that aren't working and could be improved?
Give me an example.
So when I think about all of the federal funding, now this is apolitical and we're not talking about a specific example of something that is working that is a collateral damage of this impact, right? Why is it that we are so committed to the idea that the federal government has to fund all of our local problems? And I say that with full recognition that I have the suspicion that most people in their mind, they conceive of the federal government as the federal government of the 1960s that put us on the moon, where they were doing the advanced research before they had outsourced all of these things by way of grants and otherwise in the 80s and 90s. And yet now what we don't also understand is that I
I
don't know how many decades we've basically gone from the use it or lose it budgeting process.
So let me tackle
Yeah.
this in phases, and we can play tennis here. Step one would be, you brought up a great point earlier. I mentioned PBS. You're like, did you know it's only 1%? You know, we only fund 1% of PBS. That's a perfect example of there is baked in narrative that makes conservatives in particular hate PBS because, it's this federal woke funded blah, blah. It's 1% of their budget, right? You don't like it, turn it off. You know, because we don't get to pick which war my tax dollars go to. Like, you know, there's a certain amount of like moral vacuum there because everybody's okay with their issue, but not okay with the other's issue.
But is there a distortion there because PBS does have a privileged position in the media sphere from what it was when it first started, right? National Public Radio and PBS was originally the AM radio station for rural farmers who had no access to other information, right? So if you lived in the middle of deep East Texas with no newspaper or whatever, you had AM radio and you got NPR.
Sure.
And so
it was a public good.
It was a public good, which is a public good that has been privatized. And so I think there's a misconception. I think on both sides. I think I would be curious to see the data of whether conservatives or liberals or progressives or independents, what their conception of public funding is, because I don't think anyone would guess that PBS is effectively a private organization, and that it does not have the same position in the ideological or budgetary system as, let's say, the BBC does, which, by the way, the U.S. is funding a lot of the BBC as well.
Okay, so federal role, right?
Yeah.
What is? Let's go to the big dog, our military. You could argue that in the history of the world, there is no organization that has been created, managed, ran, grown, that has been more successful than the U.S. military. From scale, from integration, from technology development, from power, sway, persuasion. And that's even including the reality that you could say we lost Vietnam. You could say that we, to a degree, lost Iraq, Afghanistan, right? Because how do you even define a winner in those environments? Number one.
There's the but. Okay.
Here's where I'm going with this. There's no private institution. There's no non-governmental way or structure or model that in a, quote, free market, left to its own devices, could have ever competed against what the U.S. government did in creating and growing our military. And the intent was...
Well, I don't know if I would agree with that premise, because you have like the Dutch East India Company and sort of the mercantilist monopolies of the past that had not the same, but for their period of time, a very similar control and or ability to do things.
But I have a super simple retort to that. You think in terms of sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have in England, you have 20 teams that are in the Premier League, and everybody has their crest, right? You have one nation; it's the greatest football league in the world, soccer league in the world, but everybody has their affiliation and they have their crest, and you're either United or you're Chelsea or whatever. And if I run a parallel between this military theory, right? Nobody could do this in a private manner and create competition, and the reason why the U.S.'s model will always win. You have one crest, so it's the flag. So if you come out at me, Lockheed Martin, and you start your own team to try and become the military and outsource for the United States government, which you kind of already are.
Sure.
Nobody's going to wear your crest. You're going to have your internals that love you, but externally you're never going to have culture.
So I think I'm going to try to thread the needle through what you're getting at, and I think going back to my point about commitments to ideas that don't work. And so
Let's talk. Well,
So Eric Prince makes a good example, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong. So Eric Prince of Blackwater fame makes the example that we have as many flag officers now, so that'd be like star generals and stuff, as we did at the peak of World War II. We now have a standing army, the number, let's say a million soldiers and civilians, everybody under command versus like 14 during World War II. And I think he brings that up by way of saying, we have one of the most effective military forces in the world, hands down. We have the toys, we have the technology, we have the will-how, we have the know-how. However, to your point about Vietnam, whatever you want to say about Afghanistan, and I think whatever's brewing next, the place where no nation has ever really figured out, other than like the Romans, and we don't really want to operate like that, unless you want to take the unless you want to take the path of saying, well, this is actually the function of like USAID and Belt and Road. This is sort of a pseudo-colonial, it is sort of a capitalist colonialism.
Well, there's a big
that is bringing there. But what we fail on is when we snatch victory out of the jaw, or what do we snatch victory,
defeat out of the jaws.
Defeat out of the jaws of victory, right? And so the issue that I think we come up with is, instead of just winning the battle and saying, okay, we're done, we fought the war, we got the bad guys, now let's leave and create some organic systems to fix the problem.
You mean like USAID? Because that's its sole purpose.
Well, no,
it's soft power.
It is soft power,
and it's also to manage.
But that's what the Belt and Road is, and we don't like that either. And so, let's pick our battle.
I would look. Here's the thing. I would argue that USAID is just loaded with flaws and waste, fraud, and abuse. Right? Okay, great. What's a better solution?
Peace Corps.
No. I'm saying this to the Republican Party in general, the ones that are like, no, we got to get rid of it. Got to get rid of it. Okay, so then how do we maintain our relevancy in the world? Because, for example, global military bases.
Sure.
We are located in 83 countries, and I think the number is something like 300 or 400 bases across 83 countries globally. And who's our number one nemesis in the world? China. They've got one in Djibouti. They've got a radar in Cuba, and that's it.
Well, hold on though, because there's
so when we exit those markets, who's ready to step in?
Well, I think there's two things happening there though, and some of the misconception, when Trump talks about, or he kind of alludes to in the media, this President McKinley kind of approach, and you talk about it with tariffs as well.
Yeah.
Philosophically, and if you listen to Treasury Secretary Bessent talk about it, the American dream is not buying cheap goods from China. I agree with this. Tariffs, the world economy is not what it was in 1901, and so this isn't Smoot-Hawley tariff. This isn't voodoo economics. If we go back, if we go back to our Ferris Bueller, what we are talking about is tariffs that are meant to make American labor more competitive, so that it cannot be undercut by cheap labor in third world countries. USAID, the foreign military bases, and all of the above, it is soft power, but I think the American system since World War II has expanded and filled a void that has failed to be filled by most of the other regions or nations of the world. And so the question is, why are we so committed that America should be doing all these things? Why should America have all these bases? There's some historical reasons, right? Do you want a German foreign base in the Congo? Probably not. Or like a Belgian base in the Congo? Probably not. This doesn't work. But I also don't think that we shouldn't get upset that there is all of this movement. And I'll say that in one other way. The domain of the progressives and the bureaucracy is in process. And so as I've watched all these things transpire, I think there's a lot of things that are just really uncomfortable and really unpleasant and totally unnecessary and nasty and mean. But the counter to that is, well, you're not following process. You're not following procedure. And there's this sort of pearl clutching around.
There's got to be both.
Well,
you got to have both, because otherwise it's.
But I think we've spent 30 years trying that, and I think the pearl clutching around process and procedure, and I don't want to say constitutionality, because I think there's a lot of fuzzy opinions on that.
Yeah, but there's zero reason why the Republicans can't do that because they have the House and the Senate and the presidency. If why is process an issue whenever you are literally in charge of pulling the levers of the process?
I think that is a much more meta political question. The same way we can say how come the Biden administration or Obama 1 didn't do these same things.
But look, none of them are up. So here's okay. For all of my MAGA friends that are potentially listening, and I know you are because you troll me, here's the deal. And I'm going to say this one time. Joe Biden is not president. Barack Obama is not president. It is not his Congress. It's not either of their Congresses. We are living in 2025, and there is a triple threat power play of Republican control across the board. So please, if all of this previous precedent was so bad, and I agree, at the time, they all screwed it up. Okay, we're all in agreement. Do something. Do something within the realm of how our system was created, which has thrust us into the position that we are. We need to make America great again. We're so far off, all this stuff. Okay, let's be honest with ourselves. We just talked about the U.S. military. There's no better military in the world, period. From an economic standpoint, we are 4% of the global population, and we generate 26% of the GDP. So whatever we've been doing works. It works. Do we like it? If we're going to be honest with ourselves, we absolutely like it. We love our capitalism. We love our spending ability. We love our space. We love our attitudes, right? Where this is all falling apart and everybody's being dipshits about it is, can it be improved, right?
Well, let's bring that local now. So trust in society and leadership. Where do you land on this right now?
Well, no, I wanted to go back to one thing real quick earlier, talking about this whole repatriation of jobs. And we need, is it really about Chinese cheap goods versus, building it here? You know what? I would argue it is about cheap goods. Statistically, I got it right in front of me. Pull it up because I had a feeling we might talk about it. Auto industry employs roughly 1 million people in this country. The actual number of individuals that are building hands-on car is roughly 300,000. Okay, so we want to protect the auto industry. We want to bring all those jobs back. The median price of a car is $48,000 right now. New car, go get it. You're going to spend $48,000 right in the middle. Okay, so let's double that workforce. We're talking about a population that is literally 10 basis points, currently. So we're going to go to 20 basis points of our total population, and we're going to fucking skyrocket the price of these goods for 20 basis points of our population, and really only 10 for the newbies, right? Mm-hmm. So that we can see, it's estimated on a low end, an 18% increase in the median price of a car. Now, we sell how many hundreds or tens of millions of cars a year, right? To all those other Americans that are not the 20 basis points of manufacturers. So who are we really looking out for?
So tinfoil hat again, because I see all of this very differently, and I always have to be cautious whether or not I read too much Zero Hedge or not enough CNN. So on this issue, and I think even locally in St. Louis, we talk about GDP. We talk about these things the way that we conceived of them in our textbooks from the 80s and 90s, which was reflective of an economy that existed from the 1900s until the 1980s. I don't think it was during the Clinton administration, but we remember that it was a Republican Congress, right? So I remember, for whatever reason, very vividly, the reason when we signed NAFTA and we passed the act with China that then had our support for them to enter the WTO. The mindset at the time, in the 90s, was an intentional dismantling of the labor and working mechanisms for entering the middle class that had worked, quote unquote, since the early 1900s, late 1800s. And we can argue about that however much we want.
Yeah, we turned into a global economy. I mean, that's what happened.
And the two things happened, though, is we as an economy at the time, I remember talking about, my generation, some millennials, we were going to exist in the knowledge economy. And the idea was that everybody was going to become knowledge workers and service workers, and we would be really consuming. And what we're in today is a weird, I think, financial death spiral of consumers are tapped out. There's no more knowledge work, subscriptions, financialization that we can do to increase this level of output. And so what you see, I think that is the real outcome more than any systemic policy or anything else. That is the real outcome of the economy we're in. And so we have this K-shaped recovery coming out of the recession, which was exacerbated by all the money printing and stimulus and everything else. And now I think the car is kind of stalling out because there can be no investment at, let's say, the median wage or below. There can be no investment because everything has gotten so much more expensive. The fees and lifestyle costs.
Well, okay, bingo, you hit it on the head. We are a consumer nation. The last election was decided by inflation and perception and realities of pricing and goods. Now everybody's going to say, well, the border's broke. Everybody agrees. That's an 80-20 issue. Everybody knows the border was broke, right? Or what was the other one? Well, specifically on the right, we're too woke. Okay, define woke, and how, when was the last time you were at a library where there's a?
Did we talk about this last time?
Well, here's where I'm going with this. No matter what they do, this guise of like we're gonna bring industry back, the math just isn't there. And here's where like our economy. We talked about the 426, right? How do we get to be 26% of the world's, output? Well, because we have a lot of fucking smart people that have looked at every single scenario and have determined the path of least resistance to increase our margins, our profits, and our growth fastest is the system that we have. So the reason why we got rid of manufacturing or let manufacturing dissipate elsewhere is because they understood that the U.S. consumer, the total percentage of people that are in manufacturing is very, very low, right? The total percentage of consumers in the American society is very, very high. So let's give the majority what they need and want. And do I think fundamentally that was a great idea? I don't know, but I do like my $300 72-inch TV. I mean,
Yes.
so when this stuff comes to fruition, going full circle back to when you were like, oh, what's going to be the chaos of the summer? Those baby boomers, same thing's going to happen with goods. TV prices are going to start to creep up, car prices already. We have a car on order right now. We are begging that it shows up before some of these deadlines.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the potential of an 18, 20, 22% pop on, a fairly inexpensive good.
Where do you land on the idea as a representative, just kind of the cultural moment that we're in? And I think I think there's 68 million millennials and 73 million baby boomers today. Where do you land on the culture war issue or the policy changes if you accept that for millennials, luxuries have become affordable and living has become unaffordable, whereas baby boomers grew up in a generation where living was affordable and luxuries were unaffordable? Where do you land on that?
I think what it comes down to, the primary difference between the two, luxuries versus living, et cetera, I think it's simpler than that. I think it's family cost. Mm-hmm. Baby boomers were able to raise a family of 2 or 3, right? And buy a house that was, significantly lower adjusted for inflation. They could buy that first 3-bedroom, 2-bed house for back in the day $50,000 or $60,000 or whatever the number was. Today, that same house is going to run a young individual, forget a family, $250,000. 225, I think is the actual number. 222, I believe, is the real number, which is the pound for pound adjusted for inflation. My parents, boomers, they bought theirs at 65. Kids today would have to spend 222, right? Mm-hmm. So you have the housing expense, the simple healthcare expense, the cost at which my parents, what they had to spend, and they had no insurance, mind you.
Yeah.
And they still were able to have 3 kids and not go bankrupt because there were still systems in place and the cost itself was down. Education, right? All these things, it's just not realistic anymore for that young, the Zennials in particular. Millennials are at the tail end of it. Mm-hmm. The cost to have a family is just insurmountable for the vast majority of Americans.
So there's a real part of that problem, then there's a fake part. So the fake part, and the question that goes back to,
No, I have 3
is
kids.
it inaccessible because we are committed to old ideas? And the example of that is, I'm going to get the dates wrong. It really wasn't until the 1950s or 60s that healthcare or health insurance became a benefit of employment. And so if we look at health insurance as being attached to your employment and a subsidy, right? So the company is subsidizing your healthcare costs and therefore inflating the costs of healthcare at the ground level, right? So we have a company-sponsored health insurance program that is paying out now or denying claims, whichever you want to go for.
Yeah.
But then that then makes the marketplace for individual health insurance, which was rare, or frankly cash insurance, which is the way it used to be.
Yeah, coming from the healthcare industry back in the day, and I am not a Bernie fan. I mean, I kind of am. I like his piss and vinegar.
Yeah.
But I'm a universal healthcare guy.
Can I interrupt?
So for me, like, and I'm a free market guy. Like, I hate tariffs. I love M&A. Open up the floodgates, let people really compete. Except when it comes to healthcare, because the end user, the vast majority of the time, is being dealt a hand or an illness or a situation that was not by choice.
Let me ask, this has bothered me for years, and maybe you'll have some good insight. When they were passing the Affordable Care Act,
that was Republican light, by the way.
Yes, totally agree. The examples they gave were, little Timmy gets some debilitating disease and they lose the family farm, or it was, lower income people can't afford health insurance, or I lose my job and I lose my health insurance.
All three true.
All three true. But the solution they came up with, to me, seemed not reflective of that. And the question I always ask myself is, why couldn't, instead of retooling the whole system, why couldn't you have universal, like, primary care, which is, everything I read seems to be the largest obstacle. Regular dental checkups and primary care to catch preventative illnesses, or maybe not the emergency room or the urgent care system that we have now, but if I get the flu and I'm in a low income community, I go instead of getting pneumonia, right?
And your boosters, and
Yes.
for kids,
Why not?
or for women and girls, go get your Pap tests. These things that are
Yes.
normal.
Why not have that be universal and easily accessible, and almost like pay what you can model? And then also on the flip side of that, have let's say like a catastrophic program. So I have, I'm reasonably conservative, especially at the federal government level, but I have no issue saying for the really marginal cost of the federal budget, why is it that we don't, so let me use a social word, socialize the cost of cancer or type 1 diabetes?
Well, because Big Pharma has ticker symbols. And it is way more profitable to have individuals sick than cured. Because there's just not the money, there's not cash flow to pay for a pill that will cure you. Because that's a one and done expense.
Right, but that's where I think the middle ground is I just don't understand. Like, I don't even think, I think a universal healthcare seems unappealing, because it does not stimulate the research and development.
Well, but here's the other thing, though. Anecdotally, that's not necessarily true, because some of the greatest pharma producers, researchers, et cetera, are Scandinavian countries. Denmark is a big player. And I'm saying this because anecdotally, my wife and kids are in Denmark. We're in Copenhagen over the past 4 years, or 4 days, 4 years. That would be interesting. And they had conversations about this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's a walking society, all these, there's a lot of other factors that lead into the blue zone aspect of their healthy society. But when it came to, I guess it was the waiter or waitress or whatever sitting there, like, so is it true that you have to pay for your own health insurance? Like, Keller, my 19-year-old, was like, well, yeah. And the guy looked at him like he was a unicorn. Like, that's weird. We are the outlier. Every developed nation in the world has something super close to universal social health care, if not full-blown universal health care.
I don't know the answer to this. Would they have it if they had? So if you buy the argument that America has been world police, and if you buy the argument that we are disproportionately funding the global security through our military abroad, would they be able to have that social safety net or universal health care if they were comparably investing in that? Number two is
no, stick with number one. I will say that we made the conscious effort to decide that as a nation, we were more concerned with getting to that 26% of the global GDP than we were with the 92% quality of life ratio.
Totally fair. Also in Europe and in the US, one of the things that I think is real and becoming less of an issue is the diversity of the population. So you have a pretty homogenous population in Europe, give or take, versus the really immense melting pot that is the United States, culturally, demographically, and more importantly, geographically.
How do you feel?
And the American perspective of, it's easy in like the city of St. Louis, where we have some huge medical systems like right next door. If you are in deep West Texas, is it your obligation if you are sick to get to Dallas or Houston, or is it their responsibility to get to you? And I think it's a weird moral question, but I think the American perspective has shifted, especially in the last 20 years, seemingly, to, it needs to come to me.
Well, okay, so let me. I understand. I see where you're going with that. I believe healthcare should be in communities. Now,
100%.
Fund is different. Here's one of the hypocrisy, just Mount Rushmore ideas about this conversation, because clearly the conservative right is the group that is like no, for private markets, free markets, blah 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 blah, right? Except for, let's talk about unions. Let's talk about teachers unions, UAW, et cetera. Let's talk about municipal employees. Let's talk about first responders. And my favorite, let's talk about elected representatives. At the federal level. All of the groups that I just mentioned have some form of universal social health care. All of them. So it works for the people that are writing the policy against it. But it doesn't work for the people that are in an industry that is on an island and outside of the circle of that access.
So you brought up, I think, one of my most progressive issues, perhaps. Anytime I hear, be it Bernie Sanders seems like he's in the middle now. So take your pick of like the most progressive left person out there.
I would argue the MAGA in 24 figured out Bernie better than Democrats did in 2016, yes. And they stole all of his talking points.
Yes, and
all of them.
And take your most fringe conservative wings, right? I have felt for a very long time, whenever you hear this critique of either we need free markets and we need capitalism, or capitalism is broken, we're referring to the system that we have now, which I don't for 1 minute think is really a capital system. This is almost, I have this, again, my tinfoil hat. I think there was a cohort of business people and politicians who went to China in the 90s and scratched their head and said, hey, this isn't quite so bad. I think capitalism with Chinese characteristics, the way that they are able to have this weird sort of I'll call it quasi-fascist, quasi-communist, but really institutional control of the economy is very appealing, especially to people in power. And I think we've adopted, I don't know if you'd call it
well, we're trying to replicate it to a degree. We're going down that path.
So as much, I think China is much more of a mirror to the U.S. and sort of where we've been and where we're going in a way that most people don't recognize. And so, if you watch Fox News, you'll see articles about this dystopian surveillance of people in China. The only difference is that it's out in the open there and people know that it's happening. Whereas we have, FISA courts and surveillance and the NSA probably listening to us right now if they wanted to.
Oh
And-
yeah,
and
no,
I-
I'm
and people-
this
and people
episode's getting
think-
shadow banned. I'm telling you right now.
And people in the U.S. have this idea that this is somehow normal, and it's really only been in the last 25 years that it has become so pervasive. And that was the Patriot Act, and we can talk about that. But
Well, that's. I mean, yeah. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna round this one up because we're starting to get a little long in the tooth. I don't want to touch on a couple other topics, but this whole idea of who really is the party of freedom and transparency and free markets, et cetera. Because now at this point, we're seeing this weird figure eight movement of narratives and political ideologies. Because again, we just referenced that MAGA. Look, they are using Bernie Sanders' populist talking points on the beat, which brings me to a point that I wanted to talk about.
yes,
I'm really kind of intrigued by what's happening with AOC and Bernie. I put in my little notes the quote odd couple, or are they on point? Because somebody messed around the other day and was like on Twitter and it blew up everywhere. AOC and Bernie, 2028. Number one, Bernie Sanders is 82, 83, 80, however old he is. Not going to happen. But what triggered me and made me think like, whoa, okay, there's something here. Not them as candidates, but the fear that they're stoking, because every Missouri Republican, at the state level, the Ben, oh my God, what's the guy down in Joplin? Drawing a blank. Anyway, Nick Schroer and Ben and Bob Onder and all these guys that are just on Twitter all day long because they're so smart, and they're so great at shutting down bathrooms, but they don't bring any jobs bills to the floor. They lost their minds at that. And they were like, oh, bring it on. Yeah, I love it. And here come the memes, which tells me that kind of worries them. So for me, I'm not. Look, I just stated it, and I'll stay on the record. There's 0% chance Bernie Sanders is running for president. Him and AOC as a ticket is farcical.
sure.
But what they're doing, what they're saying, how they're doing it, there are no DNC. The DNC is not involved with what they're doing, and that's probably why it's working. When you see those posts and you see the crowds and you see the message and you see his TikTok videos are blowing up. What jumps to front of mind for you on those two as a brand?
I didn't hear. All I saw was the pictures of that, and actually had it on my list to talk about. So I'm glad you brought it up. I try to look beyond what they're saying, because the weird thing that's happened since AOC came on the scene and since Bernie sort of got stiffed by the DNC is that the Overton window of the culture has shifted. I think we're not even looking at the same window. I think there's two windows, and I think I don't know who's on the right side, because it's become such a weird combination of interest groups. But I think the Bernie AOC Overton window has a very similar view to America of what I see now, which is that this is broken, and like it is broken. It is not working.
But
and we're being gaslit and told that the GDP is up, employment is up.
It's all lies.
But everybody's like, but I'm working two jobs. What do you mean we're at full? Of course we're at full employment, because I'm working two jobs. Like, how else could we get there?
So let me go back in time. I'm
Yeah.
going to frame the question a little bit differently so that we can move on through a couple of quick points here. Bernie and AOC, if they had been on the ticket last November,
Blowout.
in their favor, I
think so.
I agree.
I think so.
And I would have never like leading up to it. I would not have been like those. Those two are the ones.
I think the political. I think fundamentally, the reason we see the vacillations and the figure eight of kind of switching people from left to right on all these different issues, I have to think it's intentional, and I have to think it represents a very deep weakness in what's going on. And what concerns me in particular about people fretting about all the federal government money is they are overlooking how they're going to be resilient locally. And I think what happens is the federal government has to dramatically cut back on benefits, grants, programs, everything else. And they're going to kick it back to the state, and the states are going to kick it back to the cities, and the cities are going to have to look around and scratch their head and say, how do we make this work?
Well, that's you're kind of touching on the big ticket item last week was the Department of Education. Everybody freaking out about that. We want to send it back to the states. Again, it's like the 1% on PBS. The reality is the Department of Education has zero say, none. They write no curriculum. They do not tell states, let alone school districts, what they should be teaching, what they have to teach. That's not in the language of their purvey, right? Mm-hmm. They are administering grant programs, Pell Grant programs, food programs. It was all originally initiated so they can make sure the kids who are in wheelchair in public schools had a ramp, right? That's where a lot of it stemmed from.
And I think there's so many government agencies, people still think that their job is to make sure that disabled kids have a ramp. And it's doing all of this other stuff that I think people, they hear about and maybe they don't understand. And I'm not, you can't be fully versed in all this, but I think so many of these agencies, especially over the last 20, 30 years, have kind of gone off the reservation, and they've experienced a lot of mission creep, which has more to do with the way the federal government budgets than it does for what they were supposed to do.
No, I agree. I think it's one of those things, and here's where I was going with that, this whole states' rights thing. That's a double-edged sword. Mm-hmm. Because if we're going to talk about the economy, if we're going to talk about taxes, we're going to talk about FEMA in the event of events that occur, like the California fires and the president wanting to blackmail them for their own money. Okay, fine. Let's talk about FEMA, right? Missouri just had 32 deaths or whatever the number was.
It was like 40 deaths and 6 tornadoes, something like that. Yeah,
blew up towns, etc. Okay, let's lean into this states' rights thing, or take it all back to the states. If California and Illinois and New York and New Jersey and Washington State and Colorado, if they all took their ball and went home, right? Do you see Texas subsidizing Arkansas when it blows away, or Missouri, or Louisiana when the next hurricane comes in? What are they going to do? Because they don't have the money. They do not have the GDP. And the others, and talking about education, statistics don't lie. This is where the Department of Education, it's just Democrats in general. You can't fucking message. That's your problem. The top 10 states in this country for K through 12 education, as far as the test scores that actually keep us a little above the Mendoza line, those numbers are procured from blue states, period. End of story. That is the story. You go look it up. Feel free. Okay, so if we start sending all this stuff back to the states, you're going to have states that are poor, that are going to get poorer because they don't have GDP solutions. They're already at low to no income taxes, right? Okay, so how you got poor people and you're going to give them more of a tax cut when they're already not paying taxes?
But I think
this is self-prophecy here.
But I think there's more to this. So depending on how you can tell me if we go too far down the rabbit hole. I think the Department of Education should be 50 people setting a national standard for educational outcomes.
Totally. That's the way. Fix waste, fraud, and abuse.
No grants, no support, no whatever. It's just, hey, look, this is the national standard, and the states can figure out how to get us there, but this is the national standard.
But address my point that I just made, because again, the mathematics are the numbers. If you take out the subsidies that are technically coming, the vast majority of federal tax funding that goes to feed these programs, right, that are benefiting red states more, those dollars are coming from blue states. So true that up. If they really want it to be states' rights and be left alone, they are killing the ATM. They're unplugging the ATM.
I think there's, but you have to look at the other side, right? So we've got to play full court tennis. The blue state, I'd ask what blue states, and if we're talking about California and New York, we're talking about tech and finance.
Massachusetts, Vermont, New Jersey,
sure. So,
all of them.
But I don't think it's really fair to say that blue state, I mean, there's like nobody in Vermont. So the ability to educate nobody in Vermont is a lot different than a bunch of people in Mississippi, right?
Yeah, but if you took test scores of Vermont versus Wyoming, it makes Wyoming look as if they're still in 18th century.
But I think there's so many other factors to that. There's so many other factors to the delivery of education, to the even just down to the nuclear family's perception and or administration of education. I think there's so much more to say than the blue states are subsidizing the red states.
Well, that's a GDP.
Yeah,
fact.
and I
That's
think
not
I think GDP at this point is an irrelevant function. I think we are so focused on macro trends that we are missing the serious deterioration on the micro level, which is, that's like saying the outside of the house looks fine, but the foundation is rotten.
So on the micro level, at what point, because I just had some afternoon beers with a buddy yesterday who is a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He's in a public school district in Illinois, has been for now, he's pushing 20 years. And I was asking his opinion on all this, and I point blank, what's the issue? Is it to Department of Education? Is it your school board? Is it your principals? Blah, blah. He goes, it's parents.
Yeah.
He was his parents. They're not showing up to conferences. They're not reading their kids. They're not doing it. Now, a lot of them are uneducated themselves. He goes, but there's a limit to what a great teacher can do. There's a limit to what a bad teacher can do. And even bad teachers, in his opinion, like they're still a safety net to a degree, but it's up to the parents to engage. So when you talk about that nuclear family, right?
Yeah.
And especially in this idea that rural Republican areas are more family friendly. Fine, quit buying your kids the devices. Quit letting them on Xbox all day. Why don't you read to them more? Oh, I can't do that. I got 2 jobs.
Yes, right. So there's a weird. I think every time I start thinking about what could a solution be, I start to, especially now in the last 10 years, I've run into this weird paradox, exactly like you described, which is, broadening back out to like FEMA and Department of Education. Would FEMA have come under such scrutiny as an organization had it not like plundered its reserves to pay for migrant hotel stays in New York?
Yeah, again,
as a pop culture issue, right?
Yeah, I would be show me the actual goods, because these are headlines.
I totally agree, but I think I'll bring it very locally, right? We have the same issue, and I think Bob Clark just did an interview with Sarah Fensky here locally about the perception of crime in downtown. The stats say it's safer. The perception is that it's unsafe. People operate on perception. And I think we have a lot of these issues where there is a lack of clarity combined with, I think, a diffusion of responsibility, where the hopeful thing I see about, you could just dismantle most of the federal government. And my hope is that on the flip side of that, people would say, oh my God, now I got to be responsible for stuff. I don't like this. It's uncomfortable. And we're going to make some different decisions. It's a whole lot easier to spend other people's money on things that are trivial or maybe don't matter than it is to vote with your wallet. And I think there's an interesting psychological experiment they've done with this. And it's probably a conservative talking point, where they're saying, would you rather have Medicare for all, right? So if I give you $100, would you rather have Medicare for all or the $100? And most people say, I'd rather have the $100 and I'll deal with it myself. and
until they get a pill, Bill.
Well, that's right. Well, and the question then is, but how much of the subsidy that we're doing is raising the cost to make it unaffordable to be cash? I don't know the answer. I think some of these, we've made these systems so complicated that,
well, to your point, like all this is optics about spend. It's about the idea of waste, and it's the idea that it's not transparent, et cetera. The big thing that's floating out in Twitter world right now is Thomas Massey. I've got the tweet up right now. Him and a number of other Republican congressmen and senators are hammering on the EBT payments, right? The Pepsi and Coke.
Snack food, Coca-Cola for SNAP. That's my next point.
Yeah. Well, okay. So look, he comes out and says, this isn't about a libertarian right. You should, where we're telling you what you can and can't do, because taxpayers don't have a say over whether or not you buy juice or Pepsi or whatever. And I kind of fundamentally understand the argument. I think it's a weak one, because let's go to the top of the food chain, right? After the financial collapse, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, that 60, 70, 80 billion or more, whatever, that we sent to 4 banks, right? Should we have had a say in how they spent that money? Because when they did stock buybacks, to me, that's no different than buying a 2-liter of Coke. You didn't need that. You did that for your own financial well-being as an institution, to answer to your shareholders. You didn't do it to help the American people and lower interest rates or fees or whatever. that are your consumers who, oh, by the way, consumer is another word for taxpayer.
Sure.
So they're going to use this argument on people that are receiving food stamps that, no, you don't get Coke or Pepsi, right? But you, Mr. JP Morgan, and your $40 billion bailout, you can do a stock buyback when nobody's looking in 12 months.
I think you touched also on the same optics, and the way that you frame that question indicates to me that there is a systemic and or subtext to the SNAP conversation that is perhaps forgotten in the moral hazard of giving money to the banks question.
So I'm a means testing guy.
Yeah.
So when it comes to welfare, SNAP or food stamps or any type of welfare, I believe the system, the federal system through the states, they need to do a better job of measuring, are we making progress per person? Are we getting them, just this dial in, how many interviews did you have this week? Like, that's all stupid, antiquated bullshit.
Totally
right?
agree.
Let's figure out a better means system so that if they are legitimately ill, sick, or they're in an impoverished county where there just aren't jobs, right? Or maybe they have a kid that is now costing them more. There's things that you can measure to say, okay, look, this is going to be difficult. We're going to give you a little bit more runway, but here's our means system. It should be no different whenever we subsidize big oil, big pharma, big banks, right? If we're going to give you that money, no stock buybacks, big oil, right? If we're going to give you this every fucking year, and nobody's talking about that, we want a cap on fuel price.
This all goes back to what I said. We are capitalism with some other characteristics. This is not a free market system.
It's CCP of America.
It 100% is. And so I think even just the nature of the question becomes impossible, because the answer is in most cases, we should not be doing that. So, for example, would it have been more cruel to let an enormous financial crisis happen in 2008, or is it going to be more cruel to basically have no tools left when it collapses the next time?
Well, it was Bush and his administration that dismantled all the oversight on the banks anyway, which allowed the banks in the system to create derivatives.
Actually, yes, but that was Dodd-Frank. So it was Dodd-Frank that got rid of the
it was bipartisan.
Yeah. I mean, so it was
they were all bought off, but it was under the Bush administration.
So
because you always got to go to the captain of the team.
So on the flip side of this, I see there's a couple different things here. So I think you got to think about externalities. So here's how I try to think about it. And I don't have an answer, and I don't have a bias towards it, because there's people who pay attention to this all day. So if you allow Coke, Pepsi, sugary drinks, and Frito-Lay, and kind of all the other snacks, pre-made freezer food, processed foods on SNAP, start there. On the one hand, if you're working 2 or 3 jobs, should we be expecting you to be cooking all this stuff? I don't think so. I think that is inhumane. On the other side of it is, but should we be subsidizing the consumption of ultra-processed foods that we know to show up in negative health outcomes? So we're paying for it on the food side, then we're also paying for it.
Oh, so yeah.
Because you have minority communities that have higher instances of heart attack, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, all of the, which are behavioral problems.
I get it.
Behavioral problems. You have all these other things, and
massive hamster wheel.
So I would rather, if they want to make the argument and say, you know what, we know, and because we've brought RFK into Health and Human Services, we believe that ultra processed foods, including sugary drinks and food and fried other whatever, are not part of a sustainable, healthy diet, in particular for the people who are benefiting from this program. What we are going to place a priority on is, we have, and again, there are places where this is inaccessible or not, but let's say you have a Deerbergs that has pre-made. We're going to allow you to buy that rotisserie chicken from, I'm not saying they go to Costco, Costco, Deerbergs, the local market. And that, I think, is a better policy.
Yeah, but when you zoom out, I mean, look, we're sitting here in the studio right now. We're looking north. You go half a mile north, food desert. You go a mile north, drier food desert. There are no grocery stores in these areas.
But there's convenience stores.
Correct.
that accept SNAP. And so the question I would have is, and I don't know.
Yeah, but the margin for the convenience stores and these gas stations, which is where the vast majority of them are pulling their groceries from, they cannot afford to roll in a tray or a wall of rotisserie chickens and take and bakes or whatever. Number one, footprint. Number two is cost.
Well, here's what you're missing though.
Shitty food is high margin.
It is high margin. So it goes back. Are we so committed to the idea that the current system we have is just bad enough that we aren't willing to think about another one?
Well, this is
or do we just get there? And I think the second part of that is actually as inflation is hitting, particularly sodas, candies, Frito-Lay's, processed food. I don't know the last thing about a bag of Lay's is like $3 for a little bag. This becomes an increasingly problematic problem. And I think this is one where when you go back to Econ 101, subsidy, you get more of it. Taxes, it's subsidy, you get more of it. Taxes, you get less of it. And I think we are getting price increase and increased consumption of these goods that we are subsidizing through SNAP. I think we should be getting less.
Well, and then you have these dopes like in Moleg that are trying to pass bills that are like the third of a bag of chip bill, right? We need at least half of a bag.
Too complicated.
Like, just stop.
Way too complicated. So
So this brings me to
DoorDash and Klarna.
I don't know.
So DoorDash just signed a deal with Klarna, which is a buy now, pay later app.
Bad idea.
So we are now financing our $6 lattes. What do you think about this?
I think it's an awful idea, and this is where big banks and the lack of regulation at the federal level. This is one of the bad byproducts of all of this Doge experiment. Everybody's looking at this thing just purely through, I don't want to waste any more money. Fine.
Are you long or short collateralized Taco Bell futures? When we package up all of these Klarna loans for Taco Bell, are you long or short?
Taco Bell is my favorite fast food, and I don't eat fast food, so I'll go long on Taco Bell futures.
I think the Taco Bell consumer is strong.
Well, it's loyal because you can get in and out of there for $5 still, which is critical. Let's talk St. Louis. Let's close out here in the backyard. I was just talking about the food deserts up north, and we've alluded to the plethora of issues that's plagued this city.
Can we do 2 rapid fires?
Give me one.
23andMe.
23andMe.
23andMe is now bankrupt, open for sale.
22. That's the DNA.
The genetics, the genetics. So all that data is now up for sale. What do you think about that?
I think it's dangerous. One, and I just got my Ancestry.com kits in the mail 2 days ago.
I believe Ancestry.com is owned by 23andMe.
Really?
Look it up. Do your own research.
It's Monday morning, man. I've only had 2 cups of coffee. Give me your second rapid fire. Is happiness a serious problem? Have you read this book? So Dennis Prager wrote it, famous for being on talk radio, wrote a book, Happiness is a Serious Problem. And the question is, I think we should all be having a little bit more fun, even as things seem to be burning. I think we should be having more fun. The question he poses is happiness a moral obligation, an achievement, an imperative, or is it a problem? No, it's byproduct. It's a byproduct of your lived experiences and kind of your process. And I think the direct Venn diagram overlap, if we look at another human characteristic that generally results in equating to happiness, is individuals with empathy. I think we have an empathy shortage, period. We look at everything myopically through how does it affect me, my pocketbook, my house, and we're really not zooming out to kind of create a more fertile ground for everybody. And these ideas that it's like, it's a bootstrap, community and all, look, that's all bullshit. When you say bootstraps, I hear you have no empathy. I'm going to, you might, I'm going to bet no.
I think bootstraps and you didn't build this are 2 ends of the same spectrum.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's all like, trying to debate with a boomer right now about the cost of living and why kids are struggling, and not having more kids and not buying houses and renting for $2,200 a month. I mean, those kind of indicators, shit's broke. And your inability to say, you know what, explain it to me and express a touch of empathy to your frustration is exactly where I'm going with this. So happiness was the question in those facets. I think it's simpler than that. I think the individuals that are happy feel good about what they believe in, feel good about what they do, feel good about how they engage, are totally okay with having confrontation in a respectful way, looking for growth. And when you do those things, the people around you tend to be more happier around you. They respect what you're doing more. They, dinner time's a little less contentious. People put their phones down a little bit quicker. All of that stuff leads to more happiness, in my opinion.
I totally agree.
Kara Spencer, hers to lose?
I think so. I think it's hers to lose. I think it's also, I'll say it's hers to lose on the election, and I think the city is going to be hers to lose. I have to kind of constantly look in the mirror and ask myself, am I being overly dramatic? But I think the demographics and the population data we just got suggest to me we have a 5-year window. The mayor's a 4-year term, right? But we have a 5-year window, I think, to right the ship and change the trends. I think if we don't, it will be too late, because what's happening right now is that larger metropolitan areas are getting larger. I think if you allow this to go on for another 4 years, even and especially if there is any sort of a drastic recession or whatever happens, I think those larger metro areas will continue to have more gravity. And the value proposition, and it goes back to this kind of boomer millennial conversation, and it's really not a millennial conversation. We're all old now. It's a Gen Z conversation. It's, how do we attract people who believe that living in a place like this will create future upward economic mobility in spite of the cost of living? And I think the people who Kara brings in will be critical to that. I think the decisions and the decision makers will be critical to that. And if it's the same cast of characters, if it's Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, I think we're on for a bogus journey.
So let's say she wins. Plenty of metrics to try and pick, but I want to go to population. If she wins, 4 years time, let's just, for simple math, let's agree that we're at 280,000 people in the city of St. Louis. Mm-hmm. What would be the new population number 4 years from now that you would consider a victory for the first 4 years, or the 4 years of a Spencer administration?
I wouldn't. It's two pieces. One is, does St. Louis have positive mind share in young people? By that I mean 35 and under across the country. So do they look at St. Louis positively as the place that they would consider living? The second is, do people think of St. Louis as a place where their economic prospects are better than elsewhere? And everything else will flow from that. And
I'm not letting you off the hook. Okay. Give me a number. 290, 300. If it's 285.
I think if we get those first two right, I think in 5 years, 300.
What if
as a region?
What if it goes to 260?
I think that's the doom loop. I think if the other way to read the demographic report that just came out is, but for 30,000 immigrants, we would have lost that population. So anything that suggests that there's something positive about the demographic data is crazy. And the question that I have too is, every city across the country is talking about immigration as like the great hope for population growth because the birth rate is declining. I think this is a demographic opiate because...
Well, didn't we talk about why the population is declining for the new families? We already solved that problem. They can't afford kids.
And the idea, which I think is, I have some issues with the assumption. If you rely on immigrants to supplement your population loss, once you get past that first generation of immigrants, I have no confidence that they are not going to fall into the same birth rate habits as people who are already.
Well, this is the faulty populist argument, and both sides are screwing it up. If we put it through the lens of population, Democrats are saying immigration is awesome because look what it does: is it grows our communities, does all these things, and adds these numbers, and it stabilizes our industries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To a degree, all true. On the other side, those guys are saying, no, we need to kill that. We need to bring manufacturing in here. We need to give people more money so they can raise their families. Now, again, somewhere in the middle of that, shit gets really expensive, which is going to compound the problem we already have. And then on the other side, you have this just lack of identity, and you just have a political quicksand that Democrats haven't figured out how to navigate out of. So, in summary, we're fucked.
Final thought.
That's my final.
Throw the bums out, open the gates, unshackle people, let them figure it out themselves. I think the more opportunity we can create and the more that it is a agnostic, systemic opportunity engine, I think the better off we'll be.
Well, anecdotally, I can tell you, I have a lot of friends that are right of center and far right. The whole, that's not what I voted for, I'm hearing it a lot.
For sure.
And these industries that require that labor, they're like, oh, shit. Because now they got clients waiting for those houses, and they just got really expensive, and they're going to be 6 to 12 months late.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just little bitty micro suburban Missouri. It's going to get worse. So thank you, Dave. That was fun, man.
That was a pleasure.
You going to come back?
Oh yeah. Anytime you ask.
We got to get we get in the weeds. We tend to go cerebral. On Mondays I want to avoid cerebral if possible. I like the record debates and
there we go.
We'll get into the shit.
Rapid fire.
Thanks for joining me, man. I'm gonna roll us out of here. Blue Monday. It's a Blue Monday. We'll catch you guys next time. Like, review, follow, share. Mondays suck. Adios.